So it's good to be back with you all this morning. We, me, myself, and some others from St. Luke spent the last 2 weeks journeying through the Holy Land, Jordan, Israel, Palestine. It was a really great trip, and it is also really, really good to be back home, back with you all this morning. So we will be spending the next 6 weeks hanging out in the Sermon on the Mount, which is found in Matthew's Gospel, chapters 5, 6, and 7. And if you are to read the Sermon on the Mount, it will take you approximately 18 to 20 minutes. And the sermon starts with what we now know as, or we term as, the Beatitudes. And there's 9 Beatitudes in the first 12 verses. And these Beatitudes you can think of as blessings. Or another way to think about it is Jesus making announcements to the people about who God is and where God is and what God is up to. I also think it's Jesus inviting us to see God in a brand new way. And I think Jesus is inviting us into this world that he has just turned upside down completely on its head. And here's what I mean by that. In the ancient world, the thinking was simple. A large part of your life would be spent trying to get the gods or the deities on your side, to get them to give you more and more blessings. So here's how it might have worked. If the rains fell upon your fields and you had a good crop season, well, this is because the gods were blessing you. If you had longevity of life, the deities were on your side. If you had wealth and prosperity, the gods were for you. Now, in the ancient world, we call this conventional wisdom, and so the opposite is also true. If the rains weren't falling on your fields, it's because the gods were against you. If you didn't have longevity, the gods weren't blessing you. If you didn't have wealth and prosperity, the gods, the deities, weren't for you. Here's a very practical way in which this worked. This is the Sikh in the city of Petra. If you don't know about Petra, it is in southern Jordan, and it is a very, very beautiful city. It's an ancient city carved out of sandstone. And here's how the Sikh, the canyon, worked. It was the entrance to the city, and it was about a mile long. And when you walk through this canyon, you can still see to this day, there are deities carved inside the walls of the canyon. And the ancient people walked through this Sikh, and they treated this like religious pilgrimage. They would stop at the different deities and make offerings of frankincense. They would offer prayers. They would ask for the gods to give them. When you made it to the end of the Sikh, you wound up here. This is called the temple or the treasury. You might recognize this from the Indiana Jones films. At the temple, at this ending point, you would make special sacrifices to the gods. This was your one big opportunity to get the gods on your side. If you had a bad season or a bad year, you were hoping for the curses to be reversed and that you might receive blessings for this new year. Now, that's pretty weird, isn't it? That a large part of their life was just about trying to get the gods on their side. Until we see how much of this happens in our contemporary world. It's not so weird, is it? A friend of mine tells me how awkward it was for a church leader to walk into his home for the first time, and he went on and on about, wow, God is really blessing you. You must be doing something right. And he says it's awkward because what does this say about people without nice homes? Is God blessing them too? What does this say about people without homes at all? Is God blessing them? When we had our first daughter, Selah, the week she was born, someone said to us, man, Ryan, God is really blessing you and Tammy because you had this easy pregnancy, which Tammy may or may not agree with. You had easy pregnancy, and then you're given this healthy, beautiful baby girl, and it's just like God is blessing you. And he said, you're being blessed because you're a pastor and you're in ministry, and you're just on this morally right path, and so God is giving. Interesting, isn't it? It's kind of pretty on the face of it. But what does this say to all the couples who aren't able to have babies? Is God blessing them too? What does this say to all the mom and dads who welcome a child into the world who's sick or with illness or with difference? Is God blessing them too? You see, I'm reminded of how often we think it's the good, the happy, the successful people, that these are the ones whom God is blessing. But then see, the Sermon on the Mount comes along. The Beatitudes come along. The opening words in this sermon are, blessed are those who are hopeless, for the kingdom of heaven is theirs. What do we do with that? And you see, throughout this sermon, I think there's a question that is being asked of us. And we'll see it all over the next 5 weeks. Do you believe in this kind of God? Do you believe in this kind of God? So a little context to the sermon. In Matthew's gospel, Matthew tells the story of Jesus in a very particular way. He tells the story to connect Jesus back to Moses, which for the first century Jewish people, Moses was the hero of the faith. All the way from birth, the gospel writer in Matthew connects it to Moses. So remember, Moses, if you were to go back and read Exodus, Moses was born into a very traumatic experience, just like Jesus. When they were both born, the kings of their day, Pharaoh in Moses' world, King Herod in Jesus' world, they both sent out a decree to have all baby boys under the age of 2 to be killed. They both went through the waters, and this was a sign of God's covenant. Moses, remember, who brought his people, the ancient Israelites, out of Egypt, and then went through the Red Sea when God split the Red Sea, a sign of God's covenant. Jesus went through the waters in the Jordan River, baptism, a sign of God's covenant. Afterwards, Moses spends 40 years in the wilderness wandering with the people. Jesus, after his passing through the water, spends 40 days in the wilderness facing temptation. And then something big happens. In the history of Israel, Moses goes up this mountain and receives the 10 Commandments. So when Jesus is going up the mountain, we are intentionally reminded that something big is about to happen. What's happening here, you want to pay attention to. Now, why would Matthew do this? Because these people, these Jewish people in the first century, living in Roman occupation, suffering in all sorts of ways, they needed liberation, the same as their ancient ancestors who were living in slavery in Egypt. Something big is about to happen. So here's how the sermon begins. When Jesus saw the crowds, Jackson, you want to come up with me, buddy? Grab a mic, it's on a chair. When Jesus saw the crowds, he went up the mountain, and after he sat down, his disciples came to him. Then he began to speak and taught them, saying, so I want you to enter into this world. What were the disciples and the crowds thinking as Jesus is going up the mountain? Jackson was in the Holy Land with us. We stood on the Sermon on the Mount together, didn't we? Remember that day?
Yeah.
Okay, so you're going to read the Beatitudes for us. By the way, if you go home and read this in the Scriptures, you're going to think, what in the heck did he just read? So what I did here is I took a mishmash of the CEB translation and the NRSV because I don't like how it starts in the CEB with the word happy. So we changed it up a little bit, and I took the NRSV there. So here we go. You ready?
Blessed are people who are hopeless, because the kingdom of heaven is theirs. Blessed are people who grieve, because they will be made glad. Blessed are people who are humble, because they will inherit the earth. Blessed are people who are hungry and thirsty for righteousness, because they will be fed until they are full. Blessed are people who show mercy, because they will receive mercy. Blessed are people who have pure hearts, because they will see God. Blessed are people who make peace, because they will be called God's children. Blessed are people whose lives are harassed, because they are righteous, because the kingdom of heaven is theirs. Blessed are you when people insult you and harass you and speak all kinds of bad and false things about you, all because of me. Be full of joy and be glad, because you have a great reward in heaven, in the same way that people harass the prophets who came before you.
Thank you, Jackson. You did a great job. This guy in the Holy Land, this is a little side story. In the Holy Land, we ended each day with what was the coolest part of your day, and he always had 2 or 3 coolest parts of his day, and they were always really good and funny to hear. So some people have interpreted the Sermon on the Mount, especially the Beatitudes, as this a list of high ideals that Jesus is urging us into. And we have said, wow, that's really nice, Jesus, but we know we could never really live in this way. And so we've just made it kind of about us and ways in which to try to live more moral lives. And I don't think the Sermon on the Mount has anything to do with that. I think this is all about, especially the Beatitudes, about a God who is full of grace, deliverance, a God who wants to rescue people, and a God who is constantly standing with people right where they're at and proclaiming to them, I am for you. Blessed are people who are hopeless. Who you see in the photo is Abdel Fattah. We met with Abdel Fattah last Saturday. He lives in a Palestinian refugee camp in Bethlehem, and this camp is called Ida. And in this camp, there's about 6,000 Palestinian refugees living on about 10 acres of land, so lots of people, little space. And Abdel Fattah has given up his life for children because he believes that the arts, Jim, you'll like this, particularly the performing arts, will change the lives of children, that it is their best hope for healthy ways to express anger and pain and sadness. Abdel Fattah told us lots and lots of stories about the struggle of his people. And he tells us that in this land there's very few resources. So this is in Bethlehem, in the West Bank. And he tells us that on this 10 acres where thousands of kids live, there's not one playground for them to play on. And then he starts telling us his personal story. You see, his wife and his children live 4 miles away in the city of Jerusalem. But he's Palestinian, and he can't cross through the Israeli checkpoint to go into Jerusalem. So each weekend, each Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, his wife and his children come to stay with him in Bethlehem at Ida. And in this moment, while he's telling that story, his daughter, who you can see in the picture, comes up to him and just clings to his leg. And it was this awkward moment because you could tell, here he is publicly speaking, and you could tell he didn't know exactly what to do. And so he bends down and he says something to her, and he gives her a kiss on the forehead. But she just stayed clinging to his thigh. And in that moment, I was really missing my girls on this day. And I thought, man, that is so something my 4-year-old daughter, Selah, would do. Come up to me while I'm speaking in public and try to hug my leg. And I wouldn't know exactly what to do, so I would awkwardly give her a kiss on the forehead and tell her to go sit down, but she would cling to my leg. And then he took us upstairs to the library where they had just refurbished a library for the children, this beautiful space. And his daughters were coloring in their coloring books the same way my daughters color in their coloring books. And his daughters were playing and giggling and laughing the same way my daughters play and giggle and laugh. And I say this because suffering is easy to ignore. It's easy to overlook as long as it's people over there somewhere else. But when you put a human face to it, suffering all of a sudden comes really difficult to ignore. And as we were ending our time with Abdel Fattah, he told me that he sees very little hope for things changing in his lifetime. And I got on the bus and I remember thinking, God, where are you in this? Why this kind of suffering? Why this? And the Beatitudes come along and they convince us that God is proclaiming right there with the people, right there in Ida refugee camp, blessed are people who are hopeless, for I am for you. I am with you. Do you believe in this kind of God? Blessed are people who grieve. On this particular morning, we were on a boat on the Sea of Galilee, a place where Jesus spent much of his time and much of his ministry. By the way, the Sermon on the Mount, the traditional site for this is a little mountain that overlooks the Sea of Galilee. There's hills all around this so-called sea. It's really much more like a lake than a sea. You can see across the shores wherever you are. But we were on this boat, and right before we went to the Sea of Galilee, we found out that our dear one here from St. Luke's, Patricia Sailors Westlake, had just suddenly passed away unexpectedly. And this happened to be Betsy Kiak's dearest friend. And so this was a moment of grieving, Ken and his wife Betsy. And Betsy describes this moment as being on the sea, being in this boat and thinking of Jesus and the things that Jesus taught. And she describes how she began to think about Patricia and how much she was like Jesus, how she lived out his teachings. And see, it causes me to think about grieving, because so often in our culture, we are told that to be strong is to be honored and to hold it together, and that grieving, and especially prolonged grieving, this is actually a sign of weakness. But the thing is, I know lots and lots of people who grieve every single day, and there's this hole in their heart. There's this empty space. And the Beatitudes come along and remind us, they convince us, blessed are those who grieve. Blessed are those who wake up every day with an empty space in their heart. Blessed are those who wake up every day and wonder if this ache is ever going to really leave. Do you believe in this kind of God? This is a small door. And in fact, if I were to stand next to this door, it would come up to about my chest. It's the entry to the Church of the Nativity in Bethlehem, the venerated site of the birth of Christ. And they call this the door of humility. Literally, to go into this church, you have to lower yourself. You have to bend down. And the image is really simple. Humility brings us closer to Jesus. And it gets me to thinking about humility and what it means to be humble. And I don't know about you all, but I don't wake up in the morning and think, geez, today I really want to be humble. My New Year's resolution was not to be more humble. Because usually, those who are most humble are those who are experiencing everything around them falling apart. Usually we're humbled when we're in the most awful situations. When things are falling apart, whether it's your family, your faith, the things that are closest to you, the things that you were once so certain of. And in those moments you cry out and you say, God, where are you? Where are you in this? And the Beatitudes come along and they convince us that God is proclaiming with everyone who is in that moment being humbled, blessed are you who are humble, I am for you. In my early 20s, I battled depression. And there were lots and lots of days when I woke up and I thought, man, are these dark clouds ever going to part? Or is this just the way it is? Is this my new normal? And there were days when I woke up full of frustration, thinking this new medication that was supposed to work has been such a disappointment. And you know, as I reflect on that time, I don't think it was answers that I was craving. But in looking back, I wonder how beautiful would it have been to have been led up that mountain, to hear that beatitude, to hear that blessing. I am for you. On your darkest days that are full of despair, I am for you. And for all those who struggle, who battle depression, to hear that blessing, to hear that beatitude, I am for you. And for all those who stand with those who are battling depression, to hear that blessing, I am for you. Rob Bell, author and theologian and speaker, he rewrote the Beatitudes a couple of years back, and he put them in his own words in his own world, and I happen to really resonate with them. Here's how he says it. Blessed are those who don't have it all together. Blessed are those who have run out of strength, ideas, willpower, resolve, or energy. Blessed are those who ache because of how severely out of whack the world is. Blessed are those who stumble, trip, and fall in the same place again and again. Blessed are those who on a regular basis have a dark day in which despair seems to be a step behind them wherever they go. Blessed are you, for God is with you. God is on your side. God meets you in that place. The gospel is the counterintuitive, joyous, exuberant news that Jesus has brought the unending, limitless, stunning love of God to even us. That's an upside-down world. Do you believe in this kind of God? So we want to end this morning the way Jesus began in the sermon, with offering a simple blessing. So I invite those of you who will be offering blessings to go to one of your stations. And during this song, as it plays, it's a song called Cry Out to Jesus by Third Day. As it plays, I encourage you, if you would like to move to one of these stations, to receive a simple blessing. Maybe you need to rehear the Beatitudes this morning. Maybe you need to encounter the God who says, I am for you. Or maybe you just need a simple blessing as we make our way up the mountain together during these next 5 weeks to discover the stories of our roots and who we are and who Jesus is calling us to be. So as the song is playing, I invite you to go to one of the stations and they'll offer just a simple blessing with oil from Bethlehem that I just got this week. They'll offer this blessing on your hand. If you'd rather sit and reflect, you're certainly welcome to do that too. Amen.